Okay, hey everybody. We are back here with our next drafting worksheet here. So this worksheet 7.1 is just a continuation sort of from 8.1 where you were simply finding the measurements. But if you watched this whole video or looking at this Prezi presentation, now we're talking about if you have, let's say you've drafted an object, right? Like let's say you've drafted a flat or drafted a door, and now you have to put in the dimensions, right? So we're talking about all those different kinds of lines, right? We're talking about extension lines and dimension lines, all that stuff, right? So I just wanted to sort of give you, I won't draft through the entire thing here, but I did want to sort of walk you through some of what you need to do there in terms of laying in your dimensions, and putting in your extension and dimension lines and all of your notations and all that kind of stuff. So I've got my tools here that I need, right? I've got my drafting pencil, right? I'd say that's, you want something like this, right? It doesn't have to be exactly a drafting pencil, but if you can get like a 0.5 millimeter mechanical pencil, that'd be pretty good. Otherwise, if you're just using a regular number 2 lead pencil, you're gonna have to keep sharpening over and over and over again. So if you can get this is a 0.3 millimeter. I don't know if you can see that, 0.3 millimeter, maybe. But 0.3 is what I prefer to use. If you can use 0.5, that's great. 0.7 is pretty thick. So you can get yourself a 0.5 millimeter mechanical pencil. That's probably gonna work best for you there. So I've got my drafting pencil or mechanical pencil. I've got my lettering guide here. You might not be able to find one of these in town. I think I ordered this one online, but it's handy for popping in those guidelines for your lettering, of course. And then we've got our architect's scale rule, right? Just like always. So in terms of deciding how to sort of go about what you're dimensioning, as our chapter mentioned, you sort of have to walk yourself through sort of mentally how you would put that together, think about the things you need to cut, right? So if you were going to put this together, what dimensions would you need, right? That's sort of what we're looking for here. And remember, we work from smallest dimensions inside out. So our overall dimensions will be the ones that are furthest away from our drawing, and our smaller dimensions will be the ones that are closer here, right? So let's see here. I think we said this is in 1/2 inch scale, I believe. All right, so I'm going to say for here on the bottom, let's start with the bottom here. I know I'm going to want what dimensions? Well, I know I'm going to want my overall dimension, right, from here to here. That'll be one that's lower out here. I know I'm going to want to know sort of a halfway dimension here, maybe not so necessary, but I know I'm going to want the dimension of the window, right? Whether or not we're saying that's inside or outside, kind of up to us there, right? So I'm going to say, I know I need at least 2 layers of dimensions, right, before, or at least one smaller one, and then my overall dimension. So I would say, yeah, let's just, for the sake of it, let's just say we need 2 dimensions. Like, we could break this up and do 3 if we wanted to. But I'm just going to say 2 dimensions just so we can just so I can sort of get you through here. We can sort of take a look at it, how we actually go about laying these in here. So first off, of course, right, if you remember from our reading, or remember from the Prezi presentation, we know that first line of dimensions, we said that we want it, somewhere around a 1/2 inch away from our drawing, right? So I want a 1/2 inch away. So if I could use my regular ruler side, right? Or I could actually find my 1/2 inch scale side, right? 1/2 inch scale. And so I'm just going to measure down a 1/2 inch and make a little tick mark, right? So let's go back to here. Right, so I'm putting it right on the edge there. Right on the corner, right, and I'm going to measure down a 1/2 inch. I'll make a little tick mark. I'm going to do that on the other side. Right, I'm going to measure down a 1/2 inch, make a little tick mark. Right, from that, right, 1/2 inch and then 3/8, right? So that would put us at a total of 7/8, right? So I'm going to measure down 7/8 of an inch. So I'm at 7. There's half, and then additional 1, 2, 3/8. Or I could just measure from this little tick mark to this little tick mark 3/8 of an inch. Right, and then here, same thing. I measured down 1/2 inch, right, and then an additional 1, 2, 3/8. See if I can get my paper scooted up in there a little better for you. There we go. So we measured down from each corner 1/2 inch and then 3/8. Measure down here 1/2 inch and then 3/8. So those are my little tick marks there that I'm going to use to draw my extension lines first, right? So remember, my extension lines are the lines that are pointing at what I'm actually measuring here. Now remember, we don't want it to actually touch, right? We want to leave about a 1/16 of an inch of white space gap between there, right? So put my ruler on there. I'm going to leave my 1/16 of an inch gap and draw down just barely over that tick mark. All right? Same thing on the other side here. I'm going to draw down just past my tick mark here. Right, there we go. So we've got both of those, right? And I'm trying to keep them, if you notice, when I'm doing that, I'm lining my ruler up on the side of the actual object, trying to keep it as straight as I can. So there's my extension lines, right? Now I'm going to draw in lightly my dimension line. Now remember, you have a couple options here. You can do a tiny little arrowhead, or you can actually draw past it and do a little slash, right? Or you can use a dot, which we said is the least preferred. So I'm just going to put it right in between there. So I've got it lined up on my two little tick marks. I'm going to draw my line. There's that one. And then down here, boom. And I went just, you can see, I just went a little past it down there, right? So I'm going to draw in my little arrowheads. Remember, we said the arrowheads, you know, they shouldn't be big and giant. You're just looking for a nice little arrowhead. Maybe, you know, something that's, you know, like 1/8 of an inch, maybe. I mean, I never really measure them. I could measure it and actually make it 1/8 of an inch if I wanted to. I usually just sort of freehand that little arrow. So I'm just going to put in my little arrowhead here. Right, put in my little arrowhead there as well, right? So if we're saying we're in 1/2 inch, so remember, furthest away are my overall dimensions. So this is going to be my furthest away dimension. So this is going to be my overall ones. If I go to 1/2 inch with my scale rule, measure it, looks like I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 feet, 5 feet. Don't make it to 6, so I'll slide over. So I've got 6 feet, and it looks like 1, 2, yeah, we'll call it 6 feet. Well, we'll call it 6 feet 2 inches. Might be 6 feet 2.5. We'll call it 6 feet 2 though, right? So I'm going to use my lettering guide, right? Get my nice little 1/8 inch here. And remember, you have a couple options in terms of lettering, right? You can do it aligned or unidirectional, right? And so I tend to try to keep it unidirectional, so everything's going in the same direction, right? As opposed to lining it up parallel with each of the sides here. So I'm going to draw my little guidelines here, very lightly. Right, got my nice light little guidelines in there. Right, remember we try to put it somewhere in the center. So right here I'm going to write 6 feet 2 inches. right? For this next one, I think that the important dimensions here, we could give a couple if we wanted to. Of course, we're trying to get what this window is, so whether or not we go from the inside or outside, but do notice that this is offset. It's not an equal distance here to here. So I'm gonna break this up, right, and probably give myself 2 different extension lines. For this time, I'm gonna go to the inside of the window, right? So I imagine that line coming all the way down here, right? Remember, I leave my little 16th gap there. So there's that one. I'm gonna do the other one here. Like I said, coming straight down from the inside. Leave my little gap. Here we go, right? So now I can put in my little arrowheads. Right, something, you know, you can measure them if you really feel like you need to, right? Again, they're about 1/8 of an inch or so. Right, so I know that I've got this measurement, and this measurement. These are the 3 measurements I need. So for this one, right, I'm saying that's the inside of the window. So I go to my 1/2 inch. Starting on my 0, it looks like I'm 2 feet. I don't quite make it to 3. So it's looking like 2 foot, pretty dang close to 2 foot 6 inches, right? So using my lettering guide again, if I wasn't, right, if I didn't have a lettering guide, right, I could use my scale rule and give myself some really light guidelines here that are about 1/8 of an inch apart, right? And we said that looks like 2 feet 6 inches, right? Here, right, so I know that now I'm looking for the measurement from the outside here to here, right? Think about the measurements you would need to actually build this, right? We built a bunch of flats and platforms during the first half of the semester, so think about what measurements you would need to put this together. So I need to know where that mark is, right? So I'm going to go ahead and measure. Pretty dang close. Well, we're going to the inside, so looks like we're about from the outside, right? Because we're going from the outside here to the inside. So don't confuse yourself like I almost did. Right, so it looks like we've got 1 foot and 1, 2, 3. It looks like about 1 foot 3, right? So here, it would be pretty tight to cram in and write 1 feet 3 in there, or 1 foot 3 inches. So what I can do, like we were looking at in the Prezi, I can actually give myself a leader line, right? And pull that dimension out, right? So I'm just gonna put in a little leader line here. So remember, I'm gonna go sort of an oblique angle from roughly in the middle here. Pull that out here. Right? Put a little dot there. Right? Put in my guidelines. Right? And that is 1 foot 3 inches. Right? On the other side here, so measuring from the outside of my flat to the inside of my window. Let's see. Looks like 1 foot 6, pretty close. Yeah, pretty close to 1 foot 6, right? Foot, yeah, I'm gonna say 1 foot 6. So this time, remember, you don't have to do the leader line. I actually enjoy doing the little splines, right? Same thing. They're that sort of big stretched out S. So I'm gonna give myself a little spline here instead. Whoop. right? So I've given myself that little spline. It's like that big sort of stretched out S with my little dot. And we said, what did we say, 1 foot? Oh, give myself my guidelines first. One foot 6 inches. There we go, right? So, you know, I've got 2 levels there, right? Now, you don't always have to, you know, have your dimensions being on top of, right? Sometimes we can actually put our dimensions like on the inside of the lines if we wanted to, right? So if let's say we're going to go to the side here. So let's say we're going to dimension over here, right? We know we'd have one line of dimensions all the way for like the overall height, right? And then probably breaking it down maybe to a couple other ones. So I'd say we could probably use 2 sets of dimensions here again. So I'm going to do that same process that I did before, right? I'm going to make my marks, right? My little tick marks here. So first I'm going to measure a 1/2 inch away. Make a little tick mark, right? And then I'm going to measure 3/8 away from that. 1, 2, 3. Right? So 1/2 inch and 3/8, right? Do the same thing up here at the top. So I'm going to measure 1/2 inch, right? And then 1, 2, 3/8, right? I'll draw my extension lines. Remember to pass my last tick mark by just a little bit, like, you know, say 1/8 of an inch or so. Leave my little 1/16 of an inch gap there. There's that one. Right? Same thing here at the top. Right? Ensuring that my extension line doesn't touch my drawing of my flat. And I'll pass that last tick mark just by about 1/8 of an inch. There we go. So in here, let's look at some alternatives here as opposed to using arrowheads and drawing our dimensions on top of the lines. We can actually put our dimensions inside the lines if that's what we want to do, right? So on this one here, you know, let's say this is our overall dimension. So I'm going to draw my line in really light this time. So match up my tick marks. I'm drawing that in really light, right? Because I want to put my dimension actually inside the line this time, right? So go ahead and measure it here. Go back to my 1/2 inch scale. And it looks like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, ooh, just barely over 10 feet. It's really close. Looks like 10 feet and maybe 1 inch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, yeah, like 10 foot. Yeah, about 10 foot 1. So we're looking at about 10 foot 1 there. So this time, remember, I'm going to keep mine unidirectional, meaning I want to be able to read all of my dimensions without having to turn my paper around. Right? If we were doing it aligned, I'd be having to write my dimensions like sideways, right? But I'm going to keep it unidirectional here. Remember we said to go about somewhere in the middle there. So somewhere in the middle, it's pretty close to there. I'm going to draw in my guidelines really light, right? And here I'm going to write 10 feet 1 inch, right? Now I can come back here. I can darken these in, right? And I'm going to sort of leave a halo, if you will, around my measurement. And I'm going to go past my extension lines just by a little bit. Right? So we kind of made a cross a little bit there. Right? Just a little bit. Actually, I'm going to extend this one out just a little bit further. right? And instead of using the arrow marks, right, we said that we can use a hash, right? So it doesn't really matter which direction your hash marks go. You just want to make sure they're going in the same direction, and they're going to be a little thicker and darker. So, you know, about 1/8 of an inch again. Nice dark hash right there. And then same thing here at the top. Oh, you can't really see that, but I'm going to draw it in anyway. A nice dark hash. And I'm going to darken in my top extension line too. There we go. Pull that down a little bit so you can see it. Right. So now I'm probably figure out, all right, so what do I need next? Well, I probably want to know the measurement from the bottom to say here, and then maybe to here, and then maybe to here, and then maybe to here. You could break it up in a few different ways, right? All we got to do though is put our extension lines in. So I'm going to say, I'll say I'm going to come to the bottom of my window. Right, and I'm going to lightly, actually first I'm going to lightly draw in my other dimension line. Just so I sort of know where it's at there, right? And let's see here. So, you know, actually I'd say, you know, I'll just break this into 3 here. So I'm going to give myself an extension line from here to here, so bottom of my window to here. Just past it, right? Making sure it doesn't touch. Same thing here, I'm going to go from my window, because that way I'm getting that way I'm telling whoever's building this how tall the window is. All right, we've got those. Now I can go ahead and take my measurements. So let's see here. This looks like from here to here. Looks like we're 1, 2, 3. Looks like we're about 3 feet 3 inches. 1, 2, 3, 3 feet 3 inches. So, I'm going to draw in my guidelines here. So, somewhere roughly in the middle. And I'll go ahead and write 3 feet 3 inches. Right, from my middle one here, I'm measuring the height of that window. It's looking like 4 feet, about 4 feet 1 inch. Right. Now you'll notice that, I'm sort of running into this dimension over here, right? So you may find that sometimes you actually do need to maybe go 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch instead of 1/2 inch and 3/8. Or maybe I do want to do my dimensions this way and do them aligned, right? You just don't really want to switch while you're doing this. You want to keep it consistent. So it's okay if I stagger it. Maybe I'll write it up higher or lower than this one, right? Writing my 4 feet 1 inch. So I'll just go, I'm just going to go a little higher with this one. Or I could cheat it over, but I'm just going to offset it a little bit, which is okay. So 4 feet 1 inch. And then at the top here, what are we left with? Looks like I'm left with 2 feet. And it looks like 6, 7, 8, 9. Looks like about 2 feet 9 inches. So again here I'll draw in my guidelines. And I'll say 2 feet 9 inches. Right. Now I can come back, put in my dimension lines. Remember to keep a halo around your actual dimensions, which is like a little gap of white space. There we go. And I'll come in and put in my little hash. So right, if whether or not you want to use arrow tips or you want to use hash marks, totally up to you. So if we take a look at that, we're getting close to, I think, being in a good spot with this one. Now you'll run into the idea there, you're never going to be able to, especially in something like this, you won't be able to cram in every single dimension, right? Remember, that's why we created cut lists, right? So we could measure these and say how wide they are. We could measure this and put it on our cut list. We're trying to give enough dimensions, though, to where they could build the majority of it without having to pull out their scale rule. Now we know some, like you'll see us in the shop, Joe and I, a lot of times we pull out the scale rule to look at one of the drawings that I've done. That's not uncommon. Most technical directors or carpenters will have a scale rule on them so they can take the measurements that they need. Because at some point you're crammed in so much that you can't even see the drawing anymore, right? So you're trying to give the most important information, also trying not to repeat or be redundant with information either, right? Since this is a window, or let's say it's a window, right? We know that the inside here is going to be open, so that is something we need to notate, right? So first thing, we're going to write open in the inside of that window, and I'm going to write this a little bigger. I'm actually going to probably use my quarter inch lettering guide here, right in the middle. Right, there's my guidelines, and I'm going to write my O, P, E, N. Open, right? Now there's a few different things you could do here to mark the area of the window. I've seen them all used. It's really just personal preference. I could put a little tiny X in each corner of the window, right? I could actually use a line and just X through the window and sort of leave a halo around it. What I like to do, I like to draw these little curves. Keep breaking my lead here. I like to draw these little curves with dots here. Right, it's telling me this entire thing here is open. Right, again, you can find examples of other ways to do it. None of them are incorrect or correct. It just comes down to sort of personal preference there. Right. I'd say we've got a good basis in here. We could, if we wanted to, come in here, right, and we could put, you know, maybe the angle of that in there if we needed to. We could give a dimension of that if we wanted to. But that's pretty much the basics. We've got our overall dimensions here. And looking at this down here, is that the actual correct dimension? Let me look back in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's actually 5 feet 2.5, not 6 feet 2. I wondered because you know you can go back and double check and you can be like, well, these add up to 2'6" plus 1'6". That's 3'6", 4 feet. That actually ends up at like 5'3", and I was like, how come all these together add up to 5'3", but this is saying 6'2", right? So I know, oh, actually this should be 5 feet 2 or 3, right? So I'll go ahead and make that little change there. Right, so just erase out my 6. Put in my 5 feet, right? So there we go. That's all the sort of basics, right, in terms of, then this one's pretty easy too, right? There's not a bunch to it. Again, if I wanted to, I could do leader lines to maybe like this one to say how long it is. You know, I could give the angle here for what the angle is there. Not super necessary. I think what we got here are the basics. The door, of course, then becomes a little more complicated, right, in terms of the dimensions that we need, right? So if we shift over here and take a look at the door, fix my, there we go. So here, we've got quite a few things going on, right? We still, of course, the thing you never want to forget, you always have to have those overall dimensions, right? The overall dimension being 10'1" by 5'2", right? Like, okay, I know that, I got it. That's the overall, I know that's the overall size, and it gets broken down from there. So if you just think in terms of working yourself from outside in, right? On the door, you may end up having like 3 layers as opposed to 2 layers of dimensions, right? We'd have the overall, and then maybe the width. Actually, we could probably get away with 2. We'd have the overall, and then we'd have the width in there. Maybe the same thing over here. You don't have to worry about sort of trying to dimension each and every individual pane, right? You will want to have the radius here, though, right? Remember, radius is, you know, from the center point to the outside of a circle or arc, right? Which is essentially half of a circle, right? So look back at the examples in the presentation and see how we mark radius. But yeah, I'd say you could probably get away with the same thing we did over here, having 2 lines of dimensions, and overall, and then maybe I'd break it down here and here. On the side, I'd have my overall dimension, and then maybe have from here to here, and then maybe a little one there to there, from there to there, there to there, there and there. So maybe you have 3 on the side, we'll see. So last thing, of course, after you've dimensioned that out, I want to see how you guys do on that one. That's your challenge on this worksheet. Of course, I want to put what scale this is in, right? I did it in 1/2" scale, so I'm going to use my lettering guide. I'll put it down here in the corner so everyone knows. Right, I'm going to say scale equals, well, actually I'll say scale colon instead. So I'll say scale colon 1/2 inch equals 1 foot 0 inches. Oh, you can't really see that, can you? Right, so scale 1/2 inch equals 1 foot 0 inches. That way anybody looking at this drawing knows, what scale am I in? Okay, I'm in 1/2 inch scale, right? And then of course I'm going to put my name at the top. Use my lettering guide. Right, and go ahead and put in my name. There we go. Right. So that's everything you should have on here. I didn't draft out the door for you. I want you to sort of try to do that on your own without me walking you through it. Right. See how close you can get. Right. But yeah, if you're confused, look back at the examples in the video, right, in the Prezi, and that should really help sort of give you a guide there as to, you know, what you may be missing, some other methods or ways or possibilities of notation. But as long as you're sort of following those basic rules from the video or Prezi, you're pretty much okay. Yeah, I think that is it. So, do your best. Don't stress out about it too much, right? Just try and get in those basic dimensions. Again, don't worry about all the individual little window panes. We're looking for, you know, probably the overall width. So we got our overall dimensions and then maybe another line or 2 of dimension lines to get some of those other, you know, overall height and width of these 3 shapes. That is it. Good luck.